Hey everyone, welcome back. And today we are going to be reading chapter 16 of The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. So get your snacks, sit back and relax. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're not already, please subscribe. Now, let's get into it. Chapter 16. It was an hour, maybe more, before Liam's breathing evened out and he began to snore. He slept flat on his back, his hands resting against the soft flannel of his shirt. His face, which earlier had seemed marked by old bruising, shadows, looked young again. He might have been able to pass as a 20-year-old with his facial scruff and solid build, but he didn't fool anyone while tucked away in sleep. His face was turned towards Zoo, who slept between us under a mountain of blankets and was currently the only thing that was keeping me from inching closer to him, from slipping my hand under his bigger one and learning the contents of his dreams. But the distance between us was there for a reason. Imagining a future in which I didn't exist, in which I had unwittingly erased myself from his memories, kept my hands pinned under my legs and my mind for once in check. When I heard Greg and his pals stir in their tents next to ours, I finally gave up all pretense of sleeping. Their voices began as a low murmur, indistinguishable from one another, and grew louder as the minutes tricked by. Finally, they turned their lanterns on the lowest setting, just enough to be visible through our own green tent's shell. I slipped out of the other side of the tent, carefully to keep my footsteps soft against the concrete. Their whispers grew in volume and urgency the closer I came. "Them," Greg mumbled. "We don't owe them anything." My hands clenched at my sides. All of the anxiety and distrust that had been swelling up inside me over the past few hours coming to a head. For a single second, I wished that I had brought my backpack inside the store with me. The panic button was there, waiting to be used if the situation blew up fast and ugly. Stupid Ruby, I thought. Stupid. I wasn't worried about taking care of Greg and his friends. Even with their guns, we still had a chance. But if they tried to pull something while we were sleeping, or if they called in reinforcements, my footsteps stopped mid-stride. Chubbs had beaten me to guard duty. He sat facing the tents, his long, spidery legs crossed in front of him, and Zoo's handbook. He sat facing the tents, his long, spidery legs crossed in front of him, and Zoo's workbook in his lap. He was leaning toward the other tents, concentrated so hard on picking up their conversation that he missed my approach and nearly jumped out of his skin when I appeared. "Zoo?" He squinted in my direction. "Zoo?" I whispered. Really? I took Zoo's workbook and pencil out of his hand and flipped the page without looking at whatever he was writing. "What are you doing?" I wrote, showing it to him. He rolled his eyes and refused to respond when I tried to put the pencil back in his hand. "Do you think they're going to try something?" After a moment, he sighed and finally nodded. Me too, I scribbled. Come with me. By the way his shoulders slumped, Chubbs seemed to think he didn't have much of a choice. He stood quickly and quietly, wiping his palms against the front of his khaki pants. I have a bad feeling about this, Chubbs said. When we were out of earshot, the tents were in our line of sight, but we weren't in theirs. About them. Do you think they're going to try to rob us? I think they're going to try to take Betty, actually. There was a long pause. I felt Chubb's eyes slide over to me, but my own were fixed on the tents, watching for trouble. You should go back to sleep. There was a gruff edge to his voice as he crossed his arms over his chest, but there was also something about the way he said it that made me wonder if he was waiting to see what I would reply. What are you even doing up? Same as you, I guess, I said, making sure no one gets brutally mugged, beaten, or murdered in their sleep, watching to see if those kids are the assholes I think they are. Chubb snorted at that, rubbing his hand over his forehead. It took some time in silence, but I felt the air between us ease from the guarded hostility to something that felt to me more like acceptance. His shoulders were no longer bunched up with tension, and when he tilted his head toward me, I saw it for the subtle invitation it was. I took a step closer. It was bad enough he had to come back here, Chubbs mumbled, more to himself than to me. God. Liam? I asked. This is where he and his friend were captured, right? Chubbs nodded. He never told me the whole story, but I think what happened was that he and Felipe were traveling and ran into a tribe of blues. Instead of recruiting them like Lee hoped, the tribe beat the hell out of them and stole everything they had. Food, packs, family pictures, you name it. They came here for a few days to regroup, but they were in such bad shape that they couldn't get away from the skip tracers finally showing up. But they were in such bad shape that they couldn't get away when the skip tracers finally showed up. Something hard settled in my throat. Lee thinks that the tribe probably called them in, Chubbs continued, that they got a cut of the reward. I didn't know what to say. The thought of a kid, of any of us, turning against our own kind made me want to smash the shelf we were leaning against into a heap of metal. I trust Liam, I said slowly. He's such a good person, but he's so easy for others to read, and they don't have the best intentions. Exactly, Chubb said. He's too busy looking inside people to find the good that he misses the knife they're holding in their hand. And even then, he'd probably blame himself for the person having the knife to begin with, and apologizing for being such a tempting target. That was what troubled me the most about Liam. If he was any more trusting and good-hearted, he would have been a Boy Scout. It was either an amazing feat of stubbornness or naivety, I thought, for someone who had seen so much death and suffering, to still believe so unconditionally that everyone was as stand-up as he is. It was something that inspired both exasperation and a fierce sense of protection and protectiveness in me and Chubbs too, it seemed. I think we both know he's far from perfect, no matter how hard he tries, Chubbs said, settling himself down on the ground and leaning back against the empty shelf. He's never been a big thinker, that one, always rushing, to do whatever his gut tells him to, and then drowning in his own self-pity and guilt when things blow up in his face. I nodded, absently fiddling with a tear in the sleeve of my new plaited shirt. I hadn't noticed before taking it. After hearing Liam with Zoo, I knew that he felt an intense guilt over what had happened the night of their breakout, but it sounded like it might run even deeper than that. I can fix that later for you. Chubbs nodded toward the torn fabric. His long fingers were splayed out over his knees, tapping against the bone. Just remind me. Who taught you how to sew, anyway? I asked. Apparently it was not the right question to ask. Chubbs' back went to stiff and straight, like I had dropped an ice cube down his back. I don't know how to sew, he snapped. I know how to stitch. Sewing is for decoration. Stitching is for saving lives. I don't do this because I think it's pretty or fun. I do it for practice. He stared at me over the rims of his glasses, waiting to see if I got what he was trying to say. My dad taught me how to stitch before I went into hiding, he said, finally, in case of emergencies. Is your dad a doctor? I asked. He's a trauma surgeon. Chubbs didn't bother to hide the pride in his voice. One of the best in the D.C. area. What does your mom do? She used to work for the Department of Defense, but got fired when she refused to register me in the Ian database. I don't know what she's doing now. They sound great, I said. Chubbs snorted, but I could see him warm to the compliment. The minutes dragged by, and the conversation waned. I found myself reaching for Zoo's notebook and flipping it over, open to the beginning. The first few pages were mostly sketches and doodles, but those gave way to page after page of math problems. Liam's handwriting was neat and precise, and surprisingly, so was Zoo. Betty traveled 118 miles in 3 hours. How fast was Lee driving? Question 2. You have 5 Snicker bars to share with 3 friends. You cut them in half. How many will each friend get? How can you make sure the leftovers get shared equally so Chubbs doesn't complain? And then I got to a page with completely different handwriting, messy and smeared. The letters were dark, as if the writer had been pressing down on the paper too hard. I'm not sure what else can be said about this book that hasn't already been said. I'm out of clever things to say, I'm afraid. Jonathan Swift has always been my favorite, but I can't get over how clever his wordplay is throughout the novel. I really can't get over how similar it is to Robinson Crusoe at times, especially when he's on the ship to Lilliput. Though his interactions with Lilliputians wasn't the strongest section, you would be hard pressed to find equally clever interplay of parody and originality. I can see why the book has been studied so carefully by scholars over the years. We meet Gulliver as a dreamy young man in search of adventure, trying to get anywhere that would involve sea travel, and see him evolve masterfully. If I had to name the best section of the book, it would probably be the Laputians section, a place I would greatly like to visit. because my own head is often stuck in the clouds, and to be able to study philosophy and mathematics all day, a dream. There was a time or two over the course of the novel that I felt Swift had gone overboard and missed some opportunities to drive home his idea of what the ideal society should be. You, as the reader, are left to figure out for yourself. This book is perfect if you love that thought-provoking literature from an objective, rational viewpoint, or if you dream about one day traveling the world yourself. I held the page up for him to see. This yours? Give me that, he said. His face was wild with panic. Not just panic. By the way his nostrils flared and his hand shook, it was almost like I had scared him half to death. Guilt shot through me. I passed it back to him and watched him tear the sheet of paper out. Hey, I'm sorry, I said, worried about the tinge of green coloring his face. I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just wondering why you practice writing essays when you said you didn't think we'd ever get to go back to school. He continued to stare at me for several seconds until something in his stony expression finally gave. Chubbs blew out the breath he'd been holding. I'm not practicing for school. Instead of tucking the sheet of paper inside the briefcase, he laid it out between us. Before camp, my parents thought the PSFs were investigating them, which, they were. They sent me up to my grandma's cabin to hide. And you remember what I said about the internet being policed? We had to find a way around it, especially when they started putting pressure on my mom's work. I glanced down at the sheet of paper again. So, you used to send book reviews? I had a laptop and a few wireless internet cards. He said, we would post book reviews online. It was the only way we could think of to talk without them catching on. He leaned over, covering the paper so only the first column of the words was visible. I'm out. Can't get to you. Can meet anywhere, name, place, or time. Missed you. Love you. Oh. I wanted to write it out now, Chubb said, in case I can get online, but only have a few minutes. You're pretty genius, I said slowly. Your whole family. I got a snort in response. Duh. The question I really wanted to ask him was inching its way up my throat when he pulled a deck of cards out of his briefcase. Want to play a few games? He said. We're going to be here for a while. Sure, but I only know Old Maid and Go Fish. Well, he cleared his throat. We don't have the right deck for Old Maid, and, unfortunately for you, I excel at Go Fish. I won the Go Fish tournament in 5th grade. I grinned, waiting for him to deal my cards. You are a star, Chubbs. His nose wrinkled at the name. I can't call you by anything else if I don't know your real name. Charles, he replied. Charles Carrington Merriweather the Fourth, actually. I tried to keep my face as straight as possible. Of course he would be named something like that. Okay, Charles. Charlie? Chuck? Chip? Chip? I don't know. I thought it was kind of cute. Ugh. Just call me Chubbs. Everyone else does. I figured it out. It must have been 5:30 in the morning. Well, after several delirious games of cards and charades that had been brought on by too much candy and too little sleep, both of us had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, to be proven right about the other boys. We kept the baseball bat beside us and never once turned our backs to the tents. When exhaustion finally set in, we took turns curled up on the ground, trying to steal a few minutes of sleep here and there. I picked up Zoo's notebook again, in an attempt to avoid being lulled by sleep by Chubb's rhythmic snores, and added a few clouds and stars on the first page of doodles. The pages fanned out under my fingers as I slipped through the note again, not catching until I found what I was looking for, 540. It was an area code for this part of the state. I was sure of it. Gramps had lived down near Charlottesville for a time, and I had a very vague memory of standing in the kitchen of my parents' house, staring at her number printed on a notepad beside the phone, but the area it covered, that was no small bit of land, and there was no real guarantee that it was supposed to represent an area code in the first place. It was easier to think of it now, without 3 eager sets of eyes, but slightly complicated by the fact that I was running on fumes sleep-wise, with more than enough time to kill. I started in again, rearranging them, trying to create anagrams, substituting different letters for others. The feeling snuck up on me slowly, crawling back up through the crowded, tired portions of my brain. The other number, 540. Where had I seen that? Why did it feel like, when it came to me, I almost laughed? Almost. I had seen the number on the radio in Greg's memory only a few hours earlier, burning brightly through even the murkiest clouds of his thoughts. It was 5:40 a.m., a radio station. Shaking Chubbs back awake wasn't enough for me, not when I thought I would actually burst at the seams with excitement. I all but pounced onto Chubb's back, both scaring him senselessly and kneeing him in the kidney in the process. I'm not sure what sound he made when I landed, but I was fairly certain it wasn't human. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" I hissed, hauling him huffing and puffing and cursing to his feet. "When they gave you Edo, did they say anything else? Green? If I could still walk tomorrow, so help me God!" "Listen to me," I hissed. "Did they say anything about tuning in or picking it up?" He fixed me with a baleful look. All they said was to check out Edo. Check out, I repeated those exact words. "Yes," he said, exasperated. "Why?" "I was wrong before," I said. "I don't think the number has anything to do with a phone number. We were right before. The last letter isn't a letter at all. It was supposed to be a 0. 540. It's some kind of radio station. How in the world did you reach that conclusion?" The tricky part in all of this, how to BS the fact I had cheated and seen the answer rather than being in possession of brain power to actually work it through. I was trying to think of what else uses 3-digit numbers when I remembered hearing them, Greg and the others. I mean, talk about needing to find a radio here. I should have mentioned it to you guys before, but I didn't think anything of it until now. Oh my God. Chubbs was shaking his head, mildly stunned. "I don't believe it." We have honestly had such shit luck this entire trip. I thought at least 2 of us were going to end up dead in a ditch somewhere before we figured it out. We need a radio, I said. I think I'm right, but if I'm not, we need to test it out before telling the others. Betty? No. I wasn't about to leave the tent unguarded, even for 15 minutes. I thought I saw a radio in the back. Let me go grab it. The store was rushing around me in the dark, streams and fading colors as I ran. But I wasn't afraid of what was lurking there, not now. I hadn't imagined the radio after all. It was back in the small cluster of rafts and blankets that Liam and his friends had set up last time he was here. Chubbs was pacing in front of the shelves by the time I got back. I set the small device up on the shelf that was about eye level and began to fuss with the buttons, searching for the on switch. I had to be the one to start it up, and the one to fumble with the volume knob. When it was it pretty much just blew our eardrums out with static. The thing was ancient, a beat-up silver box, but it worked. The speakers jumped between voices, commercials, and even old songs I recognized. It has to be AM, Chubbs said, taking the radio in his hands. FM frequencies don't go up past 108 or so. Here we go. My first thought was that Chubbs had somehow tuned it to the wrong station. I had never heard a sound like the one sputtering through the speakers, a low growl of static pierced by what sounded like a tub of broken glass being tossed around. It wasn't painful like the white noise, but it wasn't pleasant either. But Chubbs was still grinning. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, and was all too happy to explain when I shook my head. "Have you heard that there are certain frequencies and pitches that only kids with a PSI brain can pick up?" I braced a hand on the shelf to keep from doubling over. I had. Kate had told me as much, and when she explained, the camp controllers had embedded a certain frequency in the white noise to root out any of the dangerous ones still hiding out in the other cabins. It's not so much that others can't hear the noise, it's that their brains translate the sound differently than ours do. Really fascinating stuff. They did some testing with it at Caldona to see if there were any pitches that certain colors couldn't pick up and others could, and it always sounded like this when we couldn't. No sooner had the words left his mouth than there was another sharp click, and the noise cut off altogether, replaced by a soft male voice whispering, "If you can hear this, you're one of us. If you're one of us, you can find us. Lake Prince, Virginia." The same message 3 times before it clicked again and switched back to the frequency we had heard before. For a long time, Chubbs and I could only stare at one another speechless. "Oh my God," Chubbs said, "oh my God." And then we were saying it together, jumping up and down, arms flung around one another like 2 damn fools. Like we had never ever wanted to reach over and slap each other multiple times on multiple days. I hugged him without any kind of fear or self-consciousness, fiercely, with a rush of emotion that almost brought tears to my eyes. "I could kiss you," Chubbs cried. "Please don't," I gasped out, feeling his arms tighten around my ribs to the point of cracking them. Either by his internal clock or Chubbs' excited squeaks, Liam woke first. I saw him out the corner of my eye, his head of tousled blonde hair sticking out of the tent. He looked between us once and retreated back into the tent, only to re-emerge a second later, looking torn between confusion and worry. "What's wrong?" he asked. "What's going on?" Chubbs and I glanced at each other, wearing identical grins. "Get Zoo," I said. "You guys are gonna want to hear this." And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 16. Now, will it be the place that they've been searching for? What do you think is going to happen? Comment down below. And if you know the story, please don't ruin it for others. But yes, please hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. And with that, I say farewell, my dear friends. Until next time, Ruby, signing off.